Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. I wanted to talk today about all the books that I read in January. It's gonna be mostly in order. I have this stack here, and there are a few that I read from KU, so I'll have to put pictures up. I'm gonna do these mostly in the order in which I read them. I'll have to check my spreadsheet too. Hello, Cecil Man. He's in the biscuit factory. The first book I read this year, which was an absolute delight, is My Roommate is a Vampire. I'm so glad I started my year off with this book. It's so cute. So it follows this woman named Cassie, and she is an artist, and she's struggling a little bit to break out into the larger art world as a professional artist. She has several teaching jobs. She works at a library. She has a barista kind of job. She lives in Chicago, and none of her jobs really fully cover her rent. So she's basically getting evicted because she can't pay her rent on time. It starts off with her best friend finds an ad for someone trying to find a roommate. And it's stupid cheap, and it's $200 for lakefront Chicago. And so she's like, this person a serial killer? This is real? She basically is out of options, and so she answers this ad. She meets this man named Frederick and thinks he's odd, has some odd mannerisms, he's very formal. He writes letters and he doesn't like to text. It was really nice because she's in her early 30s. I can't remember if they said it was 32, 33, however old she is, but she's in her early 30s, and as someone in their early 30s, it's really nice to see someone your age on page, who hasn't quite, who doesn't feel like they've quite made it in their profession, because it's yeah, I get it. And so you're just kind of man, that just hits home a little bit. Part of why he put this ad up is so he could have a friend kind of show him how to exist in today's society. You find out, after Cassie finds out that he's a vampire, you find out that he's been asleep for almost 100 years. He was awake, was during the Regency Victorian era. It was just so sweet and so goofy. Watching him try and navigate today's society was just hilarious, because he's in he wears a cravat and has a suit and all he looks very much from the 19th century. So there's a scene where she takes him clothing shopping to have clothes more suited to today's style and everything. And it was really sweet. It was really cute. His mother is who's Judi Dench's character in Pride and Prejudice? Catherine de Bourgh. His mother is a cross between Lady Catherine and Lizzie's mother. Just meddling, but insane. Just really prejudiced and not, and controlling. And so there's stuff going on with her. It was delightful. I did feel the end, it could have been extended a little bit more. It was a little quick to wrap up. No complaints other than that. Would highly recommend if you like a little bit of the paranormal in your romance. This is it. It's not over the top vampire stuff. There is some lore discussed. It's not overwhelmingly this is what vampires are nothing like that. So the next books that I have we'll do physically, and then I'll talk about the KU ones. So the next book that I read physically was the One Piece Color Walk Compendium, and this is from the New World to Wano, which is the arc that just finished in the anime. I think they finished in the manga quite some time ago. This is all of the the color art of the different characters. Let's see if I can find my favorite. And then there's some interviews in the back with different mangaka, with Oda. They just talk about creating their works, background, and things like that. And then there's just kind of like sketches from everything. Here it is. This one is my favorite because it's got the armadillos. That one's my favorite from this one, but they're all so good. And there's like big fold out posters in the front and the back. I'll usually like read something because this is mostly just art, but I will sit down and like flip through like 30, 40, 50 pages. They're like 300 pages long, which is, I'm not complaining. They're great. It'll usually take me like 2-3 days to get through them. I'll flip through a bunch when like I'm just like settling down to go to bed, or if I'm just kind of like decompressing after work, that kind of thing. The next one that I picked up was The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse by Charlie Mackey. I've read the original edition before, but I picked this up I picked both this one and the Color Wall. No, that was from Kinokuniya. That was not from, I just went shopping the same day. But I picked this one up during the Barnes & Noble hardback sale. It's like the color, like animated edition, or it's the animated story. Sorry. They turned it into like a short film. I think it won an Academy Award last year. So I think they made it in 2022. So it's, it's like full color instead of the more like line drawing style of the original edition. And it follows a boy, a mole, a fox, and a horse. And it's just like really heartwarming story about like friendship and journeys and all that kind of thing. So it was really nice to just like reread the story in general again, but it was the first time reading this edition. Would highly recommend all of those for everyone. Alright, I had to change the battery, and we've been joined by a noodle. This is Bert. So, I want to say back in October, my husband and I went to the used bookstore, and I found the whole Parasol Protectorate series on the shelf, and I was really tempted to get the whole thing, and I was like, no, let me try, because I had wanted to read it for a while, and I was like, okay, let me just get one, I'll try it, and I ended up reading it and enjoying it, so I went back and got the remaining 4. One of the books I picked up this month was Changeless, which is the second book. First one is Soulless. This basically takes place in Victorian England. Supernatural creatures are a fully accepted part of society, so there's vampires, werewolves, and ghosts. The whole series follows a woman named Alexia, and she's half Italian, and she's what they call a preternatural, which means she can, like, if she touches a supernatural being, for ghosts, she exorcises them, so she tries not to touch them. But for vampires and werewolves, she basically turns them mortal again. Like, vampires can walk in the sun if she's touching them, and she basically stops the change for a werewolf. It starts off with her accidentally killing a rogue vampire. So she starts working with a man named Connell McCon, and he is basically in charge of like supernatural investigation side of Scotland Yard, but he's the head of the organization that looks into it. Alexia and Connell are kind of at each other's throats, and like just like antagonize each other the whole time, but they're also very attracted to each other. By the end of the first book, they get together, and I don't really feel bad saying that because I think these came out in like 2012, so they are well over a decade old. And also, if you read the blurb in the back of the second book, like you're gonna know what happens. So they get married. The second book starts, I want to say, 3 months after the first book. The werewolf brigades have been slowly returning home, like they've been called home for some reason. I think they're all like traveling from India and like getting to Egypt and then coming home, like sailing home from there. And she gets summoned into the city. Something happened in the city to make everyone, like every supernatural being, like lose their abilities. So like werewolves couldn't change, vampires could go out in the sun. She's basically tasked with finding out why that happened. Some of it is tied to her husband's former pack. He's Scottish, and he left his former pack and took over this big London pack. He leaves and travels to go look into it, and she's been tasked by the Queen to go look into it as well. He's gone for slightly more personal reasons, and then she's gone for like in an official capacity. They get to Scotland, and she's traveling with like her sister and an inventor, and then like a really good friend, and then one of her husband's like aides. The 5 of them arrive in Scotland, deal with his former pack, and like some secrets come out about why he left his former pack. They figure out what's been going on with the supernatural beings losing their abilities. And I was really enjoying this up until the last probably less than 10 pages. At the end of this book, the inventor that was traveling with them, who's a woman, she points out that Alexia is pregnant. And instead of being like really excited, this man who is supposed to be, I think he's supposed to be like 200 years old. This man loses it and accuses her of adultery, accuses her of sleeping with a mortal man. And she's like, no, what are you talking about? Like, we sleep together all the time. Just like goes off the rails. Says really nasty things to her. Like, it's not really expressly written in, but it's like, it does say he just starts calling her names. And he basically casts her out of the house. I was like, no, you're supposed to be this 200-year-old, like, very intelligent man. And, like, you can't figure out that the big thing with werewolves in this world is that they can't procreate. So, like, they have to be made. He still has that mindset that, like, it's not possible that he could have gotten her pregnant. But he doesn't stop to think that since she's a preternatural, he doesn't stop to think that his body is going to work the way a mortal man's would work in this situation, and he could have gotten her pregnant. And instead, he just immediately goes to, you've committed adultery, that's not my child, you have to leave, basically. And so she leaves and is like totally ashamed. And I was looking for reviews because I was like, unless someone can tell me that this man grovels the appropriate amount, I am not going to enjoy this book, partly because I was already not getting a ton from these characters in terms of like emotional depth and growth and that sort of thing, but also like that's a men opening their mouths and doing stupid things is usually a deal breaker for me. Like, in order to decide whether I wanted to continue with this series, because it's a 5-book series, I decided to go ahead and look up a review of Blameless, which is the 3rd book in the series, from the Dear Author podcast blog from 2010, September of 2010. In the review, she discusses the plot of the 3rd book, and while it sounds interesting on paper, the reviewer also kind of had like a meh kind of reaction to it. Essentially explains he didn't really grovel, he didn't really apologize, and it sounds like it would be wrapped up too quickly and too conveniently for me to really enjoy continuing, and it doesn't sound like there was a whole lot of character growth that happened as a result of this, in my personal opinion, a super egregious error, because if this happened to me, I would be like, okay, well, guess I'm gone, because I'm not putting up with that. I did end up going and finding reviews of the 4th and 5th books, and I was like, okay, I know the 5th one takes place in Egypt. Is it going to be worth my time? And so I read those, and I was like, no, this is like, knowing that none of these were going to be anything more than like an average read for me meant that I was like, it helped me decide that I was basically just not going to waste my time. I did enjoy the world itself, the characters themselves, the main characters. I wasn't invested enough in their relationship for me to want to continue in any way, shape, or form. So I have tried the series, and luckily that means there's 3 books off of my TBR, and I can take this back to the used bookstore, and also probably cross her off my list, because I did also look into the other series that are attached to that, and a lot of them were like, oh, her signature humor and character work, and I was like, oh, okay, well, if it's going to be a similar vibe and similar like depth of characters, then I'm not crazy interested. If you like steampunk or gaslamp fantasy, this could definitely be one to check out. I just didn't particularly enjoy it, and I think part of it is, and this is true for a lot of older like YA kind of from the same era, I feel like I've like aged out of it. And it just doesn't, like, if I had read this when it came out, I probably would have been like, yeah, this is great. And like way less upset by the 3rd book or by the 2nd book. Maybe not. I don't know that my tastes have changed too drastically over the years, but I do think at this point in time, I'm not necessarily the target audience anymore. I at least tried it and got some books off my shelf. And then the next 4, I'm just going to do these as like a group. I'm doing a Throne of Glass reread. So I'd read the first 4 books. I had not read The Assassin's Blade, but I have not completed the series ever. So Throne of Glass, Crown of Midnight, and Heir of Fire were rereads for me this month. And then I went out and got Assassin's Blade. But I read these 4. I do have a vlog. It'll be up after this video. So I read these 4. Most people probably know, but The Throne of Glass follows an assassin named Selena Sardothian, and she has just spent a year in labor camp mines. She was betrayed and she got caught, and she is summoned back to the capital to take part in this tournament to become the king's champion, but the other contenders keep dying mysteriously, and not like they've been poisoned or like someone's gone and killed them, or they just disappear, but like they're like very brutally murdered. So she starts kind of investigating while she's taking part in this tournament. I don't know that anyone would be surprised. Again, 2012 to early 2010s YA. So you probably aren't surprised to know that she survives this, but then these follow are basically like the continuation of the story. Crown of Midnight is a little bit more of like her actions in the capital after she becomes the king's champion. There's some more character growth a little bit. The world opens up a little bit, but not by much. And then The Assassin's Blade, it's 5 like prequel novellas that take place probably, I want to say they take place like 6 to 9 months before she gets caught and is sent to the salt mines. And so this kind of follows like how she became an assassin, and maybe not exactly how, but like her life as an assassin prior to her becoming the king's champion. In Heir of Fire, the world opens up a lot, and she is sent overseas to a different country, and she trains there with a guy named Rowan and learns about a little bit more about like her history. This one really reminded me of A Court of Silver Flames and like Nesta's healing journey, and then Aylin's healing journey after some of the events of the first 3 books. She actually gets time to heal and mentally deal with some of the trauma and stuff that she's been through in her life prior to this book. I do see a lot of parallels between her journey and between Nesta's journey in A Court of Silver Flames. I enjoyed, of the 4 that I've read, I think I enjoyed this one the most, and then I liked a couple of the prequel novellas. These 2 are like they feel very much like setup books to like seeing more and more of this world. There are a lot of threads that are in these first 2 books that you see like very much expanded upon in the ensuing novels. So I am halfway through Queen of Shadows right now. I wanted to get this whole series done before House of Flame and Shadow came out. That didn't happen. Not by a long shot. I think halfway through an 8-book series is pretty good. I did have to travel a little bit for work, so that kind of derailed my physical reading. It just like really slowed down my momentum, and like I wasn't at an event where I could just like have a book open, but I could just like sit there and like scroll on my phone. So I did read a lot of KU novels, so I'm going to get into those next. The first KU book I read this month was Bride of the Shadow King by Sylvia Mercedes. A part of why I read this was because Illumicrate's publishing arm called Daphne Press picked it up, so it's been published in the UK, and they also did special editions, but I was like, okay, I have not read from this author before, and I have not read these books. I didn't want to spend the money on these editions if I didn't know what it was about, and luckily it's on KU, so I was like, okay, let me try and read this before the pre-order opens. So this book follows a princess named Farain and the troll king called Vor. In this world, the Fae are like running rampant and like burning villages, killing humans. Farain's father, the king, has made an alliance with the trolls. In order to have this alliance, he agrees to like marry one of his daughters and send her home with the Troll King. Farain had originally been sent off to a convent, basically, where she's been summoned home to go and try and convince her sister to marry for this alliance. And on the way home, she and her brother are attacked by the Fae, and King Vor and his cohort save them. She ends up riding back to the castle with him. She's summoned back home and is convinced and basically like ordered to pretend to be her sister and like trick this man that she has started to become friends with and started to like as a person. She like doesn't want to trick him, but then she's basically forced into it, and so she spends like they journey back to his kingdom. Like eventually finally gets revealed because like that was the point. Some stuff goes down and he's rightly upset. The second book is kind of the fallout from that, how they go from like she's committed this crime against me and like I'm calling this alliance off, to slowly piecing their relationship back together. When I started Bride of the Shadow King, I was really excited because it reminded me a lot of Radiance by Grace Draven, which is such a wonderful like friends to lovers situation where she goes back to his kingdom and he, as they slowly get to know each other, they just form a really beautiful relationship. And I thought that's where this was going in the first probably third to half of the book. And then it changed to this like identity swap plotline. But the way that like their relationship grew in the second book, it was fine. It didn't necessarily inspire me to finish the series. I did think the world building was really cool. The Troll Kingdom is really cool. Like, they have this big thriving city, and they use like underground waterways to travel between cities, and it's like it's really cool. The event that happened that caused her to come back, like get summoned home the second time, I felt like that was like just like a really abrupt transition in the first book. The way that it's like developing, I was like, I don't know that I feel the need to continue. Like, they have gotten to the point where they are together. In my mind, like that's enough. I haven't looked up any reviews or like really the synopsis of the third one. I probably will, just to satisfy my curiosity of how it all wraps up. And I suspect that after reading that, I'll be like, okay, I'm good. That was enough. And it wasn't like poorly written or anything. The relationship didn't progress the way that I was initially expecting it to. And I was like so excited because I love Radiance and Eidolon by Grace Draven. And I was so excited to have another similar feeling book. And especially if it was another series. Like, I was like so excited to have that happen. But it didn't quite turn out that way. Like, my excitement kind of like went down accordingly. I do think the world building was really cool. And I do have to say that I am glad I read it prior to buying. I think I would have been really disappointed if I had gotten this and been like, oh, I didn't love it and I spent that money, and so I'm glad I didn't spend that money. It's definitely worth checking out. If any of that sounds like something that you might enjoy, then it was well written and pretty well paced for the most part, other than the one like event that happens like halfway through the first book. I have to read these titles because they are very long. The next 3 books that I read from KU are a series, and it's the Bubble Girls series. And the first one is All I Wanted Was Sushi, but I Got Abducted by Aliens Instead. The second one is All I Wanted Was to Be a Scientist, but Now I Have an Alien Boyfriend. The third one is All I Wanted Was a Glass of Vino, but an Italian Duke Kidnapped Me Instead. These follow 3 different couples. The first one starts off the bat with a woman named Opal who has been abducted from Earth and basically sold into... It has been like sex trafficked. In this world, humans are basically the sex workers, and the aliens that populate this world are under the impression that humans like apply to come have this job because they're like more sexually promiscuous. It basically starts with her waking up on a bus, being taken to where she's going to perform, and they're basically like strippers plus. They basically perform in bubbles, and that's why they're called Bubble. I was wrong. The series is actually called Bubble Babes. They're all injected with this drug that basically makes you like really horny, so you want to like perform and like lowers your inhibition, so you're like fine with that. She wakes up on this bus after they've given her the shot, and another dancer who's been there for a while comes up and is like, hey, if you need to take care of business before you get to the venue, do it, because the first few times that they give you this drug is really rough. It's like really overwhelming. She does, and they're in like stop and go traffic, and so she basically is taking care of business while she's making like eye contact with an alien on the outside of the bus. He's in his vehicle, and she takes care of things, and then he follows the bus and like is like, hey, she's gonna come home with me. And so it follows them and their relationship, and she reveals that she was abducted and that all of these girls have been abducted from their homes. I don't know if there are any guys. It's like a different race of aliens that were the kidnappers. basically get themselves like kicked off the planet, and all of the girls are like rescued and all of that. That's kind of where the love interests for the second and third books in the series are coming from, is from these other rescued girls. Their relationship develops. It turns out that he is a prince of this world. If you like Ice Planet Barbarians, you would probably like these. If you're like me, and you did not like Ice Planet Barbarians, it's because of questionable consent. There are discussions about consent in these. They're not blue, they're gray. So they're big gray aliens with some fun additional appendages. Not exactly the same as Ice Planet Barbarians, but entertaining. There is like a culture, like there's he's a prince of a kingdom, and like there are other societal issues. Like there is actually a society. They're really more like aquatic, and so there's like environmental stuff going on, and there's just a little bit more than like you're my mate, which there is some of that, but it's not as like overwhelming as in Ice Planet Barbarians. They're not like over the top with it. Like if the woman is like, you need to back off, they do. There are boundaries and actual discussions about consent in this one. In all three, actually, there are implements of like, I don't know that I would necessarily say BDSM, but like there's like definitely like voyeurism in the first one. And then there's the second book is the prince's aide and the woman who helped her the first time on the bus. In the second one, like that's those two characters, like on their like first date, he takes her to like a fancy restaurant, and I don't know, it's like kink night or something. And so there's a lot of like, there's like a little bit of like dom sub kind of dynamic. So I guess technically, yeah, like a little bit of BDSM, but and then like the third one, there's other stuff going on. Each one has kind of like a different, I guess kink is the right word, but if you also didn't like the breeding part of Ice Planet Barbarians, she does get pregnant in the first one, but it's not like they were like, oh, we didn't know this could happen kind of thing. In like the other ones, there's not necessarily like oh, she got pregnant, so now we want all of you to get pregnant to help like repopulate our world. There's not any of that. So I was way more entertained by these stories. It's not necessarily the greatest, not the greatest thing I've ever read, but it's definitely, I was there for a good time and I had a good time. So I do think the third one was probably my favorite. And I do think they are improving, and like the world is getting a little bit bigger as they go along. And there is that same aspect of like sex trafficked women have landed on this planet. Now this group of women has nowhere to go, so like we're going to take care of them. And so like there is that same aspect across both the series and the Ice Planet Barbarian series. So the final book from my KU in January was called A Wolf in Spring. I did end up DNFing this. This is set in New Zealand, and the premise of the book is that there has been an event, I think called the Unraveling, where the veil between our world and the supernatural world has come down. There's no glamour disguising people and making them look human anymore. So that's kind of like the kind of background story going on. The main like romance in this is this woman who is a gardener, and she's part of like a show of gardens kind of thing where people like travel around to different gardens based like on that day, and she gets introduced to this man who just bought the winery down the road. She gets told that he's coming because he wants to hire someone to design the garden and at the vineyard. when she's introduced to him, she realizes that he is like her first love from like 10 years ago. It's kind of second chance romance. It is a little insta-lovey, like she already loved him back then, but they get back together and are like instantly like back in love. And there's a lot of sex. Like, this is spicy because of the quantity, not necessarily the quality. I mean, not that it's like nothing is bad or poorly done, but just like there aren't necessarily like specific acts that make it spicy. It's just the amount that makes it spicy. They do have sex while he is in his werewolf form. There's that. There's also nodding, which I explained what that was to my husband, and he was like, all right, that's a thing that I know now. And I was like, yeah, let me tell you more. And he was just like, okay. I love being able to like throw different facts at my husband. It's pretty entertaining. Other events go on that are relating to like the overarching plot of the story, and I suspect that this will be a series, and I do actually think it is a series. I don't know if the next book is out or not, but I do think this is the first in a series, and the next one is coming out eventually. I will say one of the really, really cool things about this book is that the author really highlights the Maori language. And at the very beginning, she has like a glossary of all of the terms and phrases that she is going to use for like throughout the novel, because the main character is part Maori. It was like really cool to have like that representation in a book. I stopped reading like, I want to say like 60% of the way through. So they were already back together. Like, I already knew they were going to get together and be together, and like that was why I was there. Like, why I picked the book up is for the romance. He's very sweet. I was entertained. Insta love is not a trope that I love. I don't particularly enjoy it. I prefer a little more of a slow burn, a little more angst. There wasn't really a ton of that. If the tropes for the next book sound like ones that I would be interested in, I wouldn't object to reading it. Like, I had a fun time. I wouldn't be like opposed to like picking it back up. Obviously I would have to finish it, but I do have to say she like doesn't know about Faye, like the female main character, but like she lives in a world where she knows what a dragon shifter is, and it's just like all of the like creatures that are in romance novels, you're just like, you know what nodding is, and what like dragon, like that dragon shifters exist, but you don't know what the Fae are. So I was like, all right, I will just suspend belief because this is a plot point. But that was like, okay, I don't know if I believe you, but sure. It wasn't like objectionable. I just knew that if I continued, it was never going to be anything more than like middle of the road for me. So I was like, okay, I have other things that I would like to focus on anyway. So I just decided to use my energy elsewhere. I think that is it for me. Thank you guys for watching my little baby channel. Let me know if you have any thoughts about these, and I'll see you next time. Bye. Never mind. I've talked about this long enough.